I'll
This
start.
conference will now be recorded.
With the things that I was kind of thinking about for this class, um, there are more things that small businesses should know, but the the first thing we'll talk about today is kind of the one of the things that I think is kind of one of the biggest stepping stones of any good business. And then I also wanted to kind of give a brief overview of where I think the industry is going to help small businesses know what they could expect moving forward as they develop their IT systems and they start asking questions about what they need and different things like that. So today, um, for the roadmap for the class, we're going to talk about security practices to implement day one. So that means strong passwords. We'll talk about what MFA is, or multi-factor authentication. We'll talk about the password reset answers, and go into depth about that and how to improve your security through those. And then also just kind of talk about what we can do to, as you gain employees or as you try and become a better employee, talk about security education, all related to security. And then we're going to talk about, like I said, the IT industry trends. We're going to talk about what on-premise versus cloud services are. And we're going to talk about these acronyms, the IT industry, and I guess a lot of industries are probably really big into acronyms, but IT is really big into acronyms. So we'll talk about what IaaS is, PaaS, and SaaS is, and then briefly mention PCAAS as well. To start off, the number one thing you need to know about security for your company is it's all about establishing a comprehensive balance. So if you look at this graph, it's super simple. But the challenge with it is the more you make something secure, the less convenient it is for your users or your customers or your employees to access. But the less secure you make it, the more convenient it is to access it. So, pretty simple example, high security would be a nuclear facility. So there would be a lot of work before you even show up to the facility. You would have to establish your identification. You would need to have a background check on you to make sure that you don't have any malicious intent when going there. You would have to have legitimate reasons to go to a nuclear facility. They would probably have specific areas that you would be allowed to access, and just different things like that. So as you think about, when we talk about high security, you can kind of think of a nuclear facility and say, okay, that would be extremely hard to get into. But because it's so hard and so secure, it makes it so it's not very convenient to enter. Medium security, you could kind of think of it as a bank vault. You have, once again, you kind of have to have a legitimate reason to be there. You have to be employed. But if someone wanted to go and get a bank vault and try to break into it, it would be less work to break into a bank vault than it would be to break into a nuclear facility. And then low security would be kind of like your house. To enter someone's house, you kind of just have to break the window and you're in. So your house is super convenient. You're in it every day. No one really goes in a bank vault unless they're supposed to be there. But really, no one goes to a nuclear facility unless there is a legitimate reason, and it's very hard to establish that reason from the beginning. So whenever you are trying to establish good security practices for your company, this is the balance that you're trying to establish. Is we need to secure things, but we also need to make it so it is reasonably convenient for those interested parties to access it. Not so convenient that it's just free game, but not so inconvenient that you're losing business, you're losing customers and things like that. So as you're establishing the practices for your companies, this is kind of what you should kind of keep in mind as you start making your policies. The first and fastest way to improve security is through passwords. And this is part of the education aspect for employees. But there are a couple ways that people work to fraudulently obtain your password. The first one is brute force, which means, and we can just kind of read this definition, the method of obtaining a password through a trial and error approach, usually where a program uses a list of common passwords, words, and names to try and identify your password. So there are big lists that you can obtain, anyone can obtain off the internet, that have pretty standard passwords. So when you think of a user's password, the easiest one, and probably the one that everyone thinks of first, is just the word password. And that word would appear on the list, and you could have this program try and log in to a website or a computer or whatever, and what it would do would pair an email address with the word password. And if that person's password is password, then they just get in and it's super quick. If the simpler a password is, the quicker and easier it is to brute force the password. So when they talk about complex passwords, they are talking about preventing a brute force attack on your account. So password complexity prevents brute force attacks. Another way to obtain a user's password is social engineering, which is the use of deception to manipulate an individual to reveal personal information or confidential information. There are a lot of different methods of social engineering. There are phishing attacks, which is basically you receive an email that says, hey, I sent you over a document, please log in and view it. You go to a login page, it has your email and a field for your password, you type it in, but it doesn't take you anywhere, or the document is, some fake document. The person that sent you the email, they built the website, and now they have your password. Another method of social engineering could be they call you. So if you ever get the phone call from Microsoft where they say, hey, you've got viruses all over your computer, we need to get on it and fix it. That is also another method of social engineering. If you want, we won't watch this video as part of this class, but there is a YouTube video. It's titled The Remy Galliard Pranks Final Cup. And this is a more humorous take on social engineering. Basically, the man, Remy, social engineered his way onto a soccer pitch for a championship finals meet. So the soccer team that won, this individual just put on a jersey that matched or closely matched the winning soccer team, and he went and just celebrated with the soccer team. He shook the French's president's hand. He was able to hold the cup that the soccer team won. He took pictures with the team and signed autographs as a team member, and everyone just thought he was on the soccer team just because of a jersey on him. So it's kind of a funny thing, but it also helps understand or helps convey the message of what people are trying to do when they social engineer you to provide your password to them. Any questions on those so far? Okay, the next one.
Question quick. How common is social engineering for companies? Companies even.
It's pretty common. I think it also depends on the method. So phishing attacks are very common, but most email providers provide protection against phishing as well as spam. If someone tries to call you and social engineers their way into your company, or like shows up and says, hey, can I hop on your computer so I can print my document, kind of a thing, those ones aren't as common, but you do need to be careful. So they've done studies where they've gone and thrown a bunch of USB thumb drives in a parking lot, and people will just go pick them up and plug them into their computer. That's also another kind of method of social engineering. And so while you may not experience social engineering as often as you see or you think you experience, it is a very they found it's a very you get really good results if you attempt that method, basically. There's other videos on YouTube. There's a video of a woman. She calls into a cell phone provider with the person's telephone number and their name, and they basically social engineer the cellular provider to create her an account, to give her his social number. She changes the password on him for the account, all that kind of stuff, and just basically takes control of it. So you may not be social engineered yourself, but the companies that hold your accounts could potentially experience social engineering to try and get it, or get your account information, or just anyone's account information, and you wouldn't even know about it. So social engineering is more of a, we need to be educated and know this is a possibility and be looking for it. Does that help your question, Austin?
Yeah, I appreciate it. I know in the attorney and real estate world that people will, it's very common right now for them to get an email address that's one letter off from yours and then send it and it looks like it came from you, and they tell you to wire money to a certain account. And they've managed to get away with quite a bit of money with bad wire instructions. But I'm assuming that's social engineering as well.
Yep,
And
that's social engineering right there. It's really any, like the first part of the description, the use of deception to manipulate an individual to, and it's not just reveal personal information, but just make a mistake, right? You said one letter off, and then you don't look at the email close enough, and it's just one letter off, and the wire money, it's gone at that point. Moving on to vulnerabilities in IT systems. This is, so if you wanted to kind of rate the profitability versus convenience, or the complexity, so it would go brute force is the least complex, but it also has the least reward. You basically only get one person's account, then you have to start bouncing through common websites to see if you can take control of those as well. Social engineering is slightly more profitable because a lot of people aren't anticipating it. And if you get a call from Microsoft that says your computer's in a really bad way, people are going to not understand that Microsoft doesn't care if your computer's in a bad way. So they can get more things from you faster. But vulnerabilities, it's the most complex for people to obtain your password, but it is the biggest reward, because if they're able to identify a weakness and manipulate the weakness, then they can obtain information in bulk. So that's what they're trying to go through, is get the bulk quantity of personal information, passwords, credit cards, phone numbers, all that kind of stuff. So when you hear about, a couple years ago, Target had a breach, MyHeritage had a breach, Yahoo had a massive breach. The breaches that they're talking about is this particular form of they call hacking, and they're not going to employee in the company, or maybe sometimes they can be going to an employee, but they're looking actually at the code, trying to identify ways to manipulate the code that the companies have, to exploit the vulnerability, and then they can access information in bulk. So brute force is definitely the most common. The vulnerabilities in IT systems is the least common, but it's the most painful for companies to have it happen to them. And then social engineering is kind of the middle ground of where it's getting more common, but it's not as common as someone trying to brute force their way into your accounts and information. Okay, so knowing how people are going to try and get our passwords, let's talk about the mechanics of improving your passwords, or things to not do with your password and the things to do with your password. First off, when you are establishing your password, regardless of where it is, don't have your password contain your name. Because, for instance, we put our name on Facebook, Twitter, any social media account, public records have our names on it. That's one of the first things for them to try. So my name's Daniel, this password has Dan the Man. You know, there are other things wrong with this password, but first and foremost, by putting Dan in there, I've given them 3 letters for them to already try with my password. The next thing is the companies that you work for. Don't put the company's name or the company whose the account is for. So if you have a Google account or you work for Google, you know, don't put Google in your password name. It might help you remember it, but it's also going to be another way for them to try things when it comes to the brute force attacks. You know, there are 6 letters right there in that password that they may have just gotten for free. And then also, don't do passwords that change with either one letter, character, or number. So something that I've heard even among IT people pretty frequently is they'll write a password and then they'll just tack on a number at the end and move through it. If you look, you know, you think, oh, I have 2 separate passwords for my email and my banking, but really you don't. You just have a password that's just changed by 1 letter. And if they can tell and look at it and say, you know what, this looks like a pattern, I'm going to either go down to 1 or up to 3, or I'm going to add another 2 to it or something, then they have 3 tries and they have your password. So those are a couple of the don'ts. There's others as well. Those aren't just the only don'ts to not do. But for strong passwords, you want complexity. They talk about password complexity, and complexity is having a combination of uppercase letters, lowercase letters, numbers, and symbols. And then password length increases the complexity. So if you had a password that's only 1 character long, you have 26 letters in the alphabet for English, and then 10 numbers 0 through 9, and then all the symbols associated with those numbers, as well as maybe the question mark, the period, and the comma. And you're only looking at 50 possibilities for a password that's only 1 character long. A computer will find that in nanoseconds if it's only 1 letter long. The longer you make a password, the more complex it is. But the challenge with long passwords is remembering what the password is, which is why a recommendation is to do passphrases. A passphrase is basically something you could say in your head that is easy to remember, and then you just alter it to increase the complexity. So for instance, you could do song titles, book titles, or movie titles. So this screenshot that I have here of a notepad window is the title to the song by Elmer Bernstein, I think that's how you say his name, Walk on the Wild Side. And when I'm establishing a passphrase password, I will open a notepad window and I'll come up with what I want to do. So in this case, I was like, Walk on the Wild Side. It's a song. It's pretty easy to remember. And then I will start typing it. and I will slowly insert different characters into the password to see what is simple for me to type. So you can see I started with a capital W, added the @ symbol to replace the A, and the 0 for the O, and then a 3 for the E. And then I tried a lowercase w with kind of the same things. You can see I put an exclamation for an I and a period. And notice there's spaces between each word. And getting down, it's the fourth from the bottom. This password is about where my fingers kind of felt comfortable typing it, and it felt like something I could remember pretty easily. So I can just say to myself, walk on the wild side. But then as I'm typing it, my fingers felt comfortable putting the @ symbol in and the number 3 in with the capital W halfway through it with the slash. So you don't have to do this. This is just kind of something that I do, and then I'll start practicing it. So you'll notice the last 4 entries are, you know what, this feels comfortable, and this is what I'm going to do with it. This password is just for this example. Don't worry, this is not a password for any of my accounts. But I did take this password online simply because it's an example password, and there's a bunch of websites where you can test the password out. They say don't do a real password. You could do something similar to what you're thinking. But each website that I took it to estimated that for a computer to brute force hack this password, the one at the very end, it would take over 1 billion years for a computer to do it. Just because of length, because of the complexity of the interchanging of the letters, and a couple other variables that they were considering. They did give me some negative marks because I duplicated letters. So I had 2 W's, 2 I's, and then the space is common throughout. So I did get kind of some decreases there, but on average, it was over 1 billion years. So in terms of a password, this passphrase is actually pretty solid. No one is going to brute force this. They're not going to waste their time on it. Most people, I think, if they can't brute force your password in an hour, they're just going to walk away from you and just say, you know what, great job. Any questions on this method of establishing your password? Okay. The next thing to improve your security, and this is probably the biggest one next to password complexity that you'll see recommended, is multi-factor authentication. And basically what it is an app on your phone or a tablet or another device that provides a second way to identify you as a person. So your first credential or your first way to authenticate is your password. The second way to authenticate would be a code in the app, a text message, a phone call, a push notification, all managed through the application. So when it comes to multi-factor authentication, the recommended as the best way to do it is to receive a push notification, which means you type your password in, the website sends a message to your application that says, hey, a user tried to log in. Your application puts a notification on your phone that says, did you just try to log in now? And you can say, yes, I did, or no, I did not. So you have that second form on your phone. One of the challenges with two-factor is you do need your second device on you, or sometimes websites will allow you to have like a 30-day period where you'll just stay logged in on the website. Those are, the 30 days is fine. It won't, it will try to notify you. So for instance, if you logged in on a computer, established your 30-day period, and then you logged in on another computer, it would re-notify you and say, hey, I got a new login. Did you just try and log in? And you can say, yes, I did. It's okay, we're good. But the push notification is basically real-time attempts on your account, which is why it's recommended. So I have a bunch of different applications for your phone. Authy and Duo, which are these two right here, those rank the highest on a bunch of different websites as some of the best in terms of managing your accounts, the usability, as well as backup. So let's say you lost your phone, you've now just lost the second method of authentication. Authy and Duo provide the best restoration process to get you back to where you can, you got a new phone, you set it up, and those two provide the best way to do it. Microsoft Authenticator does not have push notifications, but it is also a pretty decent application. I believe this icon is LastPass, and then in terms of ratings, Google Authenticator actually comes near the bottom half of the pack in terms of usability and restoring from losing the application or access to the application. These three over here are just some other ones that I know about. This one is Okta Verify, this one's Sophos, and this is 2FA. Those ones I don't really know ratings on or usability, so I won't have any recommendations for those ones. But it does, from what I can see in the industry, Authy is rated pretty high, as well as Duo. I've used Duo, and it's pretty good. It's a good user experience. Any
So
questions?
this,
Sorry, go
yeah,
ahead.
sorry. So is this, are these apps that you get?
These would be an app that you would download on your phone. They're in the App Store. And any website that offers two-factor authentication has a process that they can walk you through to set it up.
So I do on my my banking, I have it, and on my email, I have two. Oh, yeah. Anyway, multi-factor. Thank you.
Yep, banking is definitely good. And for instance, the bank that I would go through, they have their own system and way of doing it. They don't go out to a third party, which there's pros and cons to it. And so you may experience where some companies say, we'll use any third party app, that's okay, we don't care. Other companies say, we're going to have this particular one. The company that I work for, they have Okta. They're going to start using Okta. And you could use other ones for some pieces, but in terms of push notifications requirements, Okta does provide those. And since the company I work for requires the push notifications, that's why me as a employee need to use Okta. But like for instance, if you shop on Amazon, you can get whatever one of these, and Amazon, it's usually a QR code. When you want to set up two-factor authentication, you'll go to a page that provides you a QR code that you'll just scan on your phone, and your phone's ready to go with the app. Okay, any other questions? Awesome. Okay, the next piece that probably people don't consider very often, and sorry, just to jump back, multi-factor authentication also prevents brute force or social engineering against your accounts. So if someone, tells you, hey, give me your password, you provide it to them, and then they go and log in, this will notify you and say, hey, someone just tried to log in with your account, and you can say that's not okay, and you stop that attempt right there, and then you can go reset your password and everything. So multi-factor authentication prevents or helps protect against brute force as well as social engineering. Password reset questions. So there's a lot of websites and companies that when you need to go reset your password, they will ask you reset questions. Some of these examples are some of the most common. What's your mother's maiden name? Where did you meet your spouse? What city were you born in? All that kind of stuff. The problem with a lot of these questions that if you answer truthfully to these questions, they are really easy for someone to see the question and determine what the answer is. So because of social media, most of the information on these questions is online that someone can look through your social media accounts and find the answers to them. Because of that, they present a risk in that your passwords can be reset simply because the information that the questions that, or the information that the question is trying to get is common information, not something very unique or not very easy to determine. There are things you can do. Number one, you can go and identify the most unique questions. So some websites do have fairly unique questions, like let me think if I can come up with a good one on the spot. What was the name, or what was the name of the book you read in first grade or something like that? There are ones that are pretty unique that you can, as you're reading through the list of questions, you can say, hey, I'm going to go with this one. This information I'm pretty sure is not out on social media, and it's pretty unique, and so it would be hard for someone to identify that. The other two alternatives are putting a password in for the answers. So for instance, you have your login password, and then you could do a different password as the answer for these questions. So if you put a password in, or some kind of complex combination of letters and numbers, then the chances of someone identifying through social media or social engineering what the answer should be is very challenging. You can also do nonsensical answers. So for instance, what is your mother's maiden name? You can say the blue wind or something like that, where you know what it is, but it doesn't truly answer the question. So you can just say and plan this out. Probably one of the main takeaways is just planning out how you're going to approach setting up passwords and these password reset questions. Is, you know, whenever you have a relative, you can say, I'm going to do an article, a noun, and an adjective, or article, adjective, noun, and have that, and then just set up that pattern based off of what you've determined before you show up to do this. Any questions on these? Okay. And last thing, more of an education as well, is password managers. Password manager is a database that stores all your usernames and passwords. It can also have notes associated with it. So if you wanted to type out what the questions are and your nonsensical answers and all that kind of stuff, you can put that all into a database. These sound very risky because you're basically combining all your password information outside of your head and putting them into a database that potentially could be compromised. And while that risk is present, these companies that provide these services do everything they can to mitigate those risks. The password databases are hashed, or they're encrypted, so they're very secure. It makes it really, and they make it so no one could just take the database and break the encryption on it. There's also different kinds. There's some in browser, and then there's some databases that are stored on your computer that nothing outside of your computer have access to, which is KeePass. So 1Password, LastPass, and Dashlane are applications or in-browser password managers. KeePass is a database stored locally on your computer that isn't in the browser, and someone would have to be able to get to the location on your computer to obtain that database. Once again, it's encrypted. It'd be really hard to break it, so they would just need to break the password on it. So going back to having a really good password, that's what you want on these as the first password to access your password manager. What a password manager allows you to do is to randomly generate passwords. So you could do a 30-character password with letters, numbers, symbols, all that combination of stuff. You don't have to remember it ever. You don't have to say, well, I forgot my password, I got to reset it. You will just go into your password manager and put it in. And even if someone hacks the company and manipulates a vulnerability that the company has, and the company, the data that they're storing is obtained by the person with criminal intent, then you have a 32-character password that's unique to that website, and it's not going to do them any good. Because it's so complex and so unique, it won't work anywhere else. So password managers are good in that way, that they allow you to make your passwords even more complex. You just have to make sure that your password to log in and connect to the database is very good. Any questions on password managers?
And I've always been curious from a small business perspective, is it wise to advise employees to use that? I know I'm always concerned they get hacked and then all your passwords are there. But I'm just curious as a business owner if it's something I should encourage employees to use or not, or if they should keep a spreadsheet on their computer or notepad by their computer, you know, kind of what's preferred there.
I think going back to that balance of convenient versus secure, honestly, the notepad by your computer, you know, if you can lock that in a drawer at your desk or something, that would be definitely the most secure, because it's not obtained through a digital means. And so you would have to kind of establish that balance. So going back to the don'ts of password, establishing your password, you would need to educate your employees and say you need a unique password per account. And as soon as people start getting into that, then they start to do the repeating number or incrementing number at the end of their password. And so it's finding the balance of, I'm going to trust my employees to be good with their passwords, or if I say you need to use a key pass or a password manager, and then you can tell them all of your passwords need to be 32-bit characters, and so we're going to go that route. So it's the balance that as a small business owner you need to kind of determine that you need to find. In industry, these are very common among IT users, simply because of how many accounts that they have to deal with and how many places that they have to get into. But if your employees have, let's say, an email password and then maybe 2 other accounts and passwords that they have to do, a password manager may not be recommended for them. But you know, in IT industry, when you're logging onto multiple servers and you want those to be very secure, it makes sense to have a password manager for all of those places. So if you're very small in scope, then probably not. Just educate the employees and say, we need to make sure we got solid passwords. And that's probably the extent that you need to go.
Great, thanks.
Okay. There was one more thing. I can't remember it. I may come back around. There's one more thing about security practices that I was going to mention, but I don't remember exactly right now. So we're going to move on to IT industry trends. So I'm going to try and speak at a high level. If I get too nerdy, let me know, and I'll come back out of the technical and try and keep it simple. But the IT industry as a whole, 20 years ago, 25 years ago, even up to 10 years ago, most of your IT infrastructure was on what they call on-premise, which you go out, you buy a server, you install your email system on it, you can start sending emails. You go get another server, which now holds your HR data. You buy the software, you put it on the server, manage your HR software all through that. You go and get the software you need to run your business. You buy a server, you put it on there, or in some cases, you know, your HR server was so big that you feel like you could put another software on it, and then your server's running two different things. So that was where IT used to be. It was basically just on-prem. The challenge with it is that most of your hardware had large overhead, which means that when you go buy a server, you want to grow into your server. You don't want to go buy a server with only 100 gigs and then you use it up in a month's time. You would go buy a server with, you know, 5 terabytes worth of space, and you start using it. You build up, you know, 100 gigs a month, and then in about 3 years, you've maxed out your server, so you got to go buy some more drives to increase it. And so you're trying to over provision or have so much space that there's no concern that you're going to run out of space of what you're doing, especially for email systems. No one wants to see a message that says your mailbox is full. So everyone would go buy enormous amounts of storage space to try and prevent that from happening, and say, you know, every business wants to grow. That's you know, an awesome thing. With everyone wanting to grow, they say, well, we're going to grow into the IT infrastructure, so buy big. Buying big means to get started, there's a big upfront cost. To buy a server, to be able to grow into it, you know, you're looking at anywhere from $2,500 to $5,000 for a small business server. A company I worked for, when they bought the servers for their email system, between the licensing and the servers that they bought, it cost them $300,000 to get their IT or their email system, and that was just to get it started. So that was the model of IT. We buy it and provision to it, build up to it, and then once we get up to it, then we got to turn around and say, now we need another 300,000, and everyone's going to say, why? It's, well, we're just that big now. IT is currently a mixture of on-prem and cloud. So you do have some on-prem. A lot of places will have an on-prem server if they have data that they consider to be very sensitive. Not a lot of people want to push that out to cloud environments just yet. It's all depending on the industry and the company, but there is a mixture of, let's keep these pieces on-prem that we know we have access to, but we're fine to go buy cloud solutions for these other pieces of our business. IT is changing its model from buy big initially to buy what you need now. So for instance, if you start a website, you're not going to go buy a web server that could handle potentially 10,000 connections to the server, because, you know, it's just you driving the traffic because you keep looking at it hoping to see if someone else looked at your website. What they now do is buy a solution, so set up a server or a website that could support 1,000 users or 500 users consecutively. And then once you hit that 500, well, let's bump it up to 1,000 or 2,000, or, you know, get to the next tier of the offering. And then billing is also changing to be a per user or per month basis, which changes the big $300,000 price to, this is my cost per employee. A lot of companies know what the cost per employee is because of benefits. And so IT is trying to say, now you can, your IT needs, you can associate those needs to your cost per employee. So if you need email, it's going to cost you, you know, $12 a month for email per employee. If you need licensing for some reporting software for your company, we'll charge you $5 a user up to 300 users. And then once you get up past 300 users, we'll start decreasing the price because, you know, you like our stuff and you're giving us a lot of users. So that is where it's now. It's a mixture, and it's figure out what your needs are now, and we'll build to it. And then where it's going to be mostly cloud. And the main reason why it's going to be mostly cloud is because with on-prem, the one cost that no one wants, or no one really pays attention to until it starts to hurt, is the maintenance cost of the on-prem equipment. So when your server goes out at 2 o'clock in the afternoon, when you have, you know, you have taxes due, you gotta submit things, all that kind of stuff. When that server goes down and it takes you a whole 24 hours to fix, that's gonna hurt. And the promise of cloud is that the hardware failures will not affect your business as much as on-prem. And so to be able to eliminate the maintenance costs of your on-prem servers by just going to the cloud, that's a huge incentive for companies and IT groups, because you're now putting the risk and the burden onto another company that is promising you, this is what our service level agreement will be, and this is how available it's going to be. And so it's a huge benefit to eliminate the maintenance cost. IT is going towards on-demand computing. So for instance, right now we build infrastructure that matches the need plus a little bit. So you know that you have 500 consecutive users and you're looking to grow. You've been growing about 20 users a month. So you're going to build your infrastructure to be, 600 and then 700, and you're going to try and grow in front of your curve. On-demand compute is where you have a product. So let's say a login page. On-demand compute is when your login page, the code and everything is stored, but it doesn't have a server running your login page until a user clicks on the button that says login. When the user clicks on the button that says login, request will be for, give me server resources, spin up this page, and let the user log in. Once they log in, then I'm going to delete everything, turn everything off, and I don't need the login page anymore. I've sent them to this other page. And what this allows companies to do is to get very granular on the resources they're using to give them the best resource to expense ratio. And it allows them to only use what they truly are using. They don't even have to grow in front of the curve like where IT is right now. Billing is still per user on a monthly basis. All right, so some terms to know. IaaS. This is infrastructure as a service. So this is a cloud offering, and it's where there's a service provider that gives you virtualized computing. So instead of that physical server, they have a server on their premise that they build your servers on, or your websites on, and you can maintain everything about the infrastructure. They maintain the hardware, you maintain the infrastructure that you want. Some examples, there's many companies doing this out there. The two heavy hitters in the industry is Microsoft Azure and Amazon Web Services, or AWS. So these two companies, they have all the servers, they have all the equipment, and they say, you can build whatever you want, just use our servers. That's infrastructure as a service. PaaS, or platform as a service, is when the service provider delivers a platform while managing the infrastructure for the customer. So Microsoft Azure and AWS, they're in the industry as both an infrastructure as a service and a platform as a service provider, because it makes the most sense and makes the most money. But there are other examples of this, and Another example could be, or would be, Weebly. So for instance, you build whatever website you want, they will provide the server hardware as well as the infrastructure to run your website, and you don't have to worry about that. They'll just say, this is how many users you get for what you're paying for, we'll maintain it, all that kind of stuff. But they provide the platform where you go build your website and they run it for you, and you're just like, as long as my website's up, I'm happy with it and we're good to go. The next one is SaaS, or software as a service. And this is when you have applications that are typically or could be on your computer, but they are accessible over the internet from anywhere you want. So these examples are Google Apps, so Google Docs, Google's Calendar, Dropbox. It's accessible anywhere. You don't have to have a Dropbox folder on your computer. You can just upload to Dropbox on the website, or on its website. And then Office 365 is another one. This is the web version though. So Office 365, you can still install the desktop clients. That's not a SaaS solution. The web version of Office 365, where you can go and work on documents, all that kind of stuff, that is what software as a service would be. Questions on these? Or is it pretty understandable?
It's a lot to take in, but I'm getting the gist of it. We're doing Weebly on our nonprofit, so I kind of get that, where they have all the codes put in there and we just tell it what to do.
From a small business perspective, you're going to be more in the PaaS or SaaS environments. You're not going to be in infrastructure as much unless you have specific IT needs for infrastructure. The infrastructure as a service is where a lot of companies that are pretty large and they have very specific needs, they build their needs in these environments. But the small businesses would exist more in a platform as a service or a software as a service environment.
All right. Okay. Thank you. Well, and thanks for explaining the cloud. I kept thinking, what are they doing with all this stuff floating around in there? So there's actually a place that they have the hardware, and you're sending you're doing your infrastructure, but it's sending it and they're taking care of the storage part.
Right.
Not an actual building, right?
Yeah. And
like everybody, it's out there. I'm like, but how is it out there?
Yeah. And that's one of the hardest things to conceptualize, is because as soon as it leaves your office space, it's very complex. It's amazing that it works as well as it does sometimes. But with the infrastructure as a service, these companies, they build all over the world because they want to be able to provide as close to as possible to your location, your product offerings. In addition to that, some countries require that the data of their citizens need to be on servers within their own country. An example of this is Russia. You cannot have data regarding Russia citizens outside of Russia. You need to have it inside of Russia. So if you wanted to do business in Russia, what the infrastructure as a service providers, Microsoft Azure, AWS, have done, they have gone and built, they call them basically server farms, just rows upon rows of servers within Russia. They've got places, you know, in Europe, Africa, United States, all over the place. And they built them there so you can still run all of your software, you can still do business as normal. You just, whenever you're setting up things for your Russian customers, you would go to the location. They have these, what they call zones. You would go to the Russian zone and you would build your servers there, basically. And these aren't very, so like when you're sitting here like, okay, what do I need to know as a small business owner for IT? This is not like the first thing to know. This is when you start to hear these terms, as you start to establish your IT systems, it's good to know, okay, this is what they're talking about. They're talking about software that I can just use, or they're talking about a platform that I can build what I need on it. Or, you know, when you get into the infrastructure as a service, hopefully you've grown to the point where it's like, we really need to be in this part of the industry, and we know where we're going with it. And in terms of the IT industry trends, these solutions are just going to be more common because it's these solutions that usually charge on a per user basis. And so these are your cloud solutions, and there's just gonna be more and more as time goes on. And this also might help Leah conceptualize what's going on. This is Microsoft Azure's kind of definition. This is a very common model or graph that you can find just about anywhere. But this kind of helps visualize what you're doing with your data or your industry or the different solutions. So on-prem is all the way over here. It's you take care of everything. You bought your server, you bought your storage, you bought your switching. You have to go buy your operating systems, and you build your own applications, and you store your own data. Infrastructure as a service, you're still managing to some extent the virtualization. You can, and that's by building your own servers, but in terms of server hardware, storage hardware, and the networking, that's managed by Microsoft in Azure if you're doing infrastructure as a service. The blue part is still you. Platform as a service, you build your application. So Weebly, you build your website, you publish it, that's it. You don't go ask them, hey, what operating system are you running my website on? You don't ask them, you know, how are you storing my data? All that stuff, they just manage it, and you know you can access it. And then software as a service, they provide everything. So, and a good example of why software as a service is attractive is that when you install Office 365 on your desktop, you periodically need to run updates on it. But software as a service, the web version of Office 365, it updates automatically, you never see it, and it never affects you. Microsoft just takes care of all of those things on their own. So this is a really good breakdown to kind of conceptually see how each service is broken between the three that companies are offering more frequently. Okay, and then that's all I have. If anyone has any questions, let me know.
Just one question real quick. On if you're a small business owner working remotely with employees, you know, I don't know, are there good options for a small central, I don't know if it's a server to log in through, or I don't know, just quick thoughts if you have any on how to deal with employees and remote locations and data files, all those things.
I personally haven't provided any solutions, but I think that that is where you'll see Dropbox or OneDrive come into play. So, or even Google Docs. I know that Google, I haven't had Google on here, but it definitely belongs in cloud services that it provides. But Google is a, from what I can see, they're really trying to get the small business market. So through their Google Docs and all that kind of stuff, and their Google Drive, they're trying to build things to help small businesses in that regard. But I think that, just going to get Dropbox or OneDrive storage, then providing access to your users, I think that that would be probably one of the simplest things to build to get started. I think as you grow, and I don't know, I don't know if I could say how many employees you would want to target, but as you start to get a little bigger, you would definitely want to get into a more established area like Microsoft Office 365 or Azure or Google cloud services.
Great, thanks.
Thank you. I love all the lingo because the more I hear it, the more it starts making a little bit more sense.
Good.
Thank
Good.
you.
I'm gonna stop the recording.